Luisa Piccarreta, a collection of memories of the Servant of God. Introduction. His loving care to keep alive the memory of the people of our land, who with their humble daily work and acceptance of life's suffering were distinguished for their love of God and neighbor, was what prompted Father Bernardo Bucci, our Capuchin friar, to write these family memoirs of Luisa Piccarreta, nicknamed Luisa the Saint. The interest in Luisa is worth mentioning, both because of the attention devoted today to acquiring a deeper knowledge of this mystic, and Luisa is such, since with her contemplation and acceptance of physical and spiritual sufferings, she attained a remarkable intimacy with Jesus. And because Luisa was known and visited by several of our friars, who were able to communicate to her essential elements of Franciscan spirituality, while from her they assimilated love for Christ and commitment in doing God's will. May this book, which involved Father Bernardino with such love and enthusiasm, give enjoyment to all who read it, so that they feel impelled to learn more of Luisa's spirituality and to further her beatification.
Preface.
The warm insistence of Archbishop Corato of Trani, now emeritus, impelled me to put down in writing the testimonies about Luisa Piccarreta. They were told to me by friends and others who knew the servant of God personally. In some episodes, I was directly involved. During my childhood, I had continuous and direct contact with the servant of God, made easier by my aunt Rosario Bucci, who assisted her day and night for about 40 years. The two of them worked together at lace making and embroidery, by which they earned a living. My relatives were connected to the Piccarreta family by many family ties. My sisters, Isa, Maria, and Gemma, were frequent visitors to Luisa's house, where they learned how to make lace. Gemma, the little one, was the favorite of Luisa, who, when she was born, suggested she be given that name. Luisa's sister, Angelina, was godmother at the baptism and sponsor at my sister's confirmations. We were therefore so intimate with her that everyone in the family called her Aunt Angelina. We spoke to Luisa with great familiarity. I remember that my mother used to go regularly to Luisa's house and have long conversations with her. Nothing is known of what they said. I think Luisa foretold her premature death. I presume this from the fact that my mother would often speak of her own death and stress to us that she had not long to live. She died at the age of 51, 3 years after Luisa, wearing one of the Servant of God's night dresses. I myself was given holy pictures and images by the Servant of God. Despite our familiarity, I was tongue-tied in Luisa's presence, spellbound by her fascination. I have collected and sorted a wealth of material, but I am unable to organize it all for printing. This would require a lot of work and time, which is denied me. I have had to choose and publish what I considered most interesting. By this, I do not mean that other episodes recorded do not deserve to be known. I am absolutely convinced that any episode concerning Luisa Piccarreta serves to set her in the context of her time. I have promised myself to continue the task of organizing and researching the memoirs, and to give the printer a more exhaustive biography of the servant of God, a work I began some time ago, and which I hope I shall complete as soon as possible. Chapter 1. Biographical Notes. The servant of God, Luisa Piccarreta, was born in Corato, in the Province of Bari, on April 23, 1865, and died there in the odor of sanctity on March 4, 1947. Luisa had the good fortune to be born into one of those patriarchal families that still survive in our realm of Puglia, and like to live deep in the country, peopling our farmhouses. Her parents, Vito Nicola and Rosa Tarantino, had 5 children: Maria, Rachel, Filomena, Luisa, and Angela. Maria, Rachel, and Filomena married. Angela, commonly called Angelina, remained single and looked after her sister until she died. Luisa was born on the Sunday after Easter and was baptized that same day. Her father, a few hours after her birth, wrapped her in a blanket and carried her to the parish church where holy baptism was administered to her. Nicola Piccarreta was a worker on a farm belonging to the Mastroianni family, located at the middle of Via del Merge in a neighborhood called Torre Disperata, 27 kilometers from Corato. Those who know these places, set among the sunny, bare, and stony hills, can appreciate the solemnity of the silence that envelopes them. Luisa spent many years of her childhood and adolescence on this farm. In front of the old house, the impressive, centuries-old mulberry tree still stands, with the great hollow in its trunk where Luisa used to hide when she was little, in order to pray, far from prying eyes. It was in this lonely, sunny place that Luisa's divine adventure began, which was to lead her down the paths of suffering and holiness. Indeed, it was in this very place that she came to suffer unspeakably from the attacks of the devil, who at times even tormented her physically. Luisa, to be rid of this suffering, turned ceaselessly to prayer, addressing in particular the Virgin Most Holy, who comforted her by her presence. Divine Providence led the little girl down paths so mysterious that she knew no joys other than God and His grace. One day, in fact, the Lord said to her, "I went round the earth over and over again. I looked at all creatures, one by one, in order to find the littlest of all. Among many, I found you, the littlest of all. I liked your littleness, and I chose you. I entrusted you to my angels, so that they might keep you, not to make you great, but to preserve your littleness. And now I want to begin the great work of the fulfillment of my will. Nor will you feel greater because of this. On the contrary, my will shall make you smaller, and you shall continue to be the little daughter of your Jesus, the little daughter of my will." When she was 9, Luisa received Jesus in the Eucharist for the first time and Holy Confirmation, and from that moment learned to remain for hours praying before the Blessed Sacrament. When she was 11, she wanted to enroll in the Association of the Daughters of Mary, flourishing at that time in the Church of San Giuseppe. At the age of 18, Luisa became a Dominican tertiary, taking the name of Sister Maddalena. She was one of the first to enroll in the Third Order, which her parish priest was promoting. Luisa's devotion to the Mother of God was to develop into a profound Marian spirituality, a prelude to what she would one day write about Our Lady. Jesus' voice led Luisa to detachment from herself and from everyone. At about 18, from the balcony of her house in Via Nazaro Ciaro, she had a vision of Jesus suffering under the weight of the cross, who raised his eyes to her, saying, "O soul, help me." From that moment, an insatiable longing to suffer for Jesus and for the salvation of souls was enkindled in Luisa. So began those mystical sufferings which, in addition to her spiritual and moral sufferings, reached the point of heroism. The family mistook this phenomena for sickness and sought medical help, but all the doctors consulted were perplexed at such an unusual clinical case. Luisa was subject to a state of corpse-like rigidity, although she showed signs of life, and no treatment could relieve her of this unspeakable torment. When all the resources of science had been exhausted, her family turned to their last hope, priest. An Augustine priest, Father Cosma Loadice, at home because of the Saccharitan laws, was summoned to her bedside. To the wonder of all present, the sign of the cross, which this priest made over the poor body, sufficed to restore her normal facilities instantly to the sick girl. After Father Loadice had left for his friary, certain secular priests were called in who restored Luisa to normality with the sign of the cross. She was convinced that all priests were holy, but one day the Lord told her, "Not because they are all holy, indeed, if they only were, but simply because they are the continuation of my priesthood in the world. You must always submit to their priestly authority, never oppose them, whether they are good or bad." Throughout her life, Luisa was to be submissive to priestly authority. This was to be one of the greatest sources of her suffering. Her daily need for the priestly authority in order to return her to her usual task was her deepest mortification. In the beginning, she suffered the most humiliating misunderstandings on the part of the priests themselves, who considered her a lunatic filled with exalted ideas, who simply wanted to attract attention. Once they left her in that state for more than 20 days. Luisa, having accepted the role of victim, came to experience a most peculiar condition. Every morning she found herself rigid, immobile, huddled up in bed, and no one was able to stretch her out, to raise her arms, or move her head or legs. As we know, it required the presence of a priest who, by blessing her with the sign of the cross, dispelled that corpse-like rigidity and enabled her to return to her usual task, lace-making. She was a unique case in that her confessors were never spiritual directors, a task that our Lord wanted to keep for himself. Jesus made her hear his voice directly, training her, correcting her, reprimanding her if necessary, and gradually leading her to the loftiest peaks of perfection. Luisa was wisely instructed and prepared during many years to receive the gift of the divine will.